I'm delighted to welcome you this morning to the Economy and Future of Work stage. And I hope that you've got your coffees ready and that you're sitting comfortably, because we've got a really exciting event up for you now. We're going to be talking about trust and other essential ingredients of outstanding leadership. And I'm sure that lots will be discussed today, which will be of interest to what you're doing. So I recommend that if anything gets your attention, then what you should do is go onto Twitter and tweet at CogX 2020, or also tweet our partner institute, the Institute for the Future of Work, @_Future of Work. I'm now delighted to hand over to Dan Murray-Serter, who will be the moderator for today's event.
Hi guys, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to this panel on trust and other outstanding qualities of leadership. I'm joined for the session with Anne Cairns of Mastercard, who's the vice chairman, and Damian Bradfield, who is the co-founder and president of WeTransfer. So I think we can all just get comfortable by referring to him by his preferred moniker of Mr. President. I'm your host, Dan Murray-Serter. I'm the co-founder of brain health and mental wellness company Heights, and I write a weekly newsletter on science-based mental performance and cognition, which might be why I've been asked to moderate and ask questions of our very intelligent guests, who realistically, I think would do a much better job of describing and introducing themselves. So very briefly, if we could go to you first, Anne, a short introduction for yourself.
Thanks very much, Dan. Well, as Dan said, I'm the vice chair of Mastercard. I'm also the chair globally of the 30% Club, which actually, advocates for over 30% of women on boards and in C-suites around the world. I also chair Financial Alliance for Women, which covers 135 countries and is made up of big banks and networks that are interested in developing products for women. And lastly, I'm also the chair of IceClear Europe, which is one of the biggest clearing houses in the world, based in London. Thank you.
And over to you, Mr. President.
I'm not on as many boards or chairs as Anne is, but I do chair an organization called the University of the Underground, which is a completely free MA in design experience thinking based out of Amsterdam, as well as doing WeTransfer, of course. And then last year and earlier this year, launched a book called The Trust Manifesto, which is really about this topic. So quite excited to see what we're going to talk about today.
Great. Well, we don't have too long. I'm going to go straight into it. Now, I prepared 3 really important questions worth exploring. The first is, what the hell is going on in the world? The second is it 2021 yet? And the third is, why not? No, not seriously. I did chat with Anne and Damian to get a sense of what they thought were definitely pertinent questions for us to be asking. And I'm going to start off lightly with a bit of fun. So Damian asked a very wise question, which is, I wanted to know what your favorite Black Mirror episode is and which is the closest to the situation you think we're living in London. So Damian, I'm assuming you have a particular response to that.
I think there are so many parts of Black Mirror which we're unfortunately living through today. And my particular favorite is Nosedive, but it's not necessarily the episode that we're living in right now, but it is all about the gig economy and people being graded and judged based on stars, star ratings. And unfortunately, a big part of the environment that we're sitting through today is really about that sort of rating system. But everything that we knew up until 10 weeks ago has literally changed over the last 10 weeks. So I think the conversation, the topic of this whole conference is, planning and thinking about the next 10 years. But I'd be very surprised if there are many organizations really able to really think about what's going to happen in the next 3 months. I think that should be the title of the conference. What do we do in the next 12 weeks?
And have you got a perspective on what we should be doing in the next 12 weeks?
Well, we've been actually planning all over the world inside our company the various stages that countries have been going through, because obviously, because we're in over 200 countries, we've got, people sitting in China who are, more or less going back into sort of a fairly normal environment. In Shanghai there, you see how well Taiwan's been doing. So we're in different stages of development in different parts of the world. I mean, at the same time, you've got things happening in America as a result of that terrible killing of George Floyd, actually causing people to come out in the streets and in the streets here in the UK to demonstrate on how they were feeling about it. And that is actually something which is interesting to see in a time when many states and certainly Britain's been in lockdown. So a lot of things happening right now that are impacting the social and the corporate world.
So before we get on to trust, I think it's important to understand what kind of outstanding qualities of leadership we think modern companies, whether they're scale-ups like WeTransfer or global giants like Mastercard, need to demonstrate. So less so on the personal level, more so on the organizational level. So as you were on a roll, Anne, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that, and it's perhaps an old thing to say now, but companies have got to have a purpose. And I think they're very much being evaluated about the impact they make in the world. Nobody wants to see companies actually being highly successful in terms of their P&L or their market cap and actually not affecting the world in a positive way. And so I think that's very important in terms of corporate leadership today.
And Damian?
I think without sounding like a cliche or a broken record, it's all about transparency, and it's all about honesty and integrity and empathy. And I think the days of those organizations which were faceless are numbered. If you are a faceless organization, as in just churning out products without necessarily having a good understanding as to what the supply chain looks like or who your target audience is or anything else, I think life is going to get very difficult, as the amount of distrust in the marketplace is at record levels, I think. So the consumer is going to be much more demanding, I think, of where they buy from and who they buy from. So I think it's really going to come down to leadership to be as honest and transparent as they possibly can.
Okay, so Anne, obviously at Mastercard, it's a given that you'd be an expert on trust. So we'll definitely spend some time there. But seeing as Damian literally wrote the book, and this is, as Damian knows, he signed this for me, very proud. But this is literally the book on trust, called the Trust Manifesto. I think it makes sense to start with you. So Damian, what do you think the current mood is between companies and consumers with regards to trust, and where do you think we need to get to as soon as possible?
If you'd have asked me this question in January, I would have given a very different answer to the answer that I give today. But
I think I did. You just took a long time to respond.
Probably true. Just introdo, the 21-second pause. I don't think trust has ever been lower, particularly in Anglo-Saxon culture. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position that we're based out of the Netherlands, where I think the Dutch have done an incredible job at really reinforcing trust and good communication and transparency and thought into the process. And they called the lockdown that we had here the intelligent lockdown, that it wasn't extreme, it was well thought through, and they just trusted individuals, I think, to sort of stick by the rules. I can't say the same for a lot of Anglo-Saxon culture, where I think trust really has gone out the window, and that's what we're seeing, feeling, and particularly in the US, on a daily basis, seeing it at very, very shocking and worrying levels. I think there has never been a more important time for us. I think, particularly because our business is driven by the internet, which we've become completely reliant upon, from my teenage kids having to study and learn through Zoom or other tools, through to business being purely mainly conducted over the internet. I think the internet is going to go through a process of really being checked and measured and held accountable. And what I'm quite excited by is that even over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, we have seen phenomenal steps being made to address that lack of trust. Twitter, for example, taking huge steps with the president to actually ensure that news that is being circulated is truthful. For the last 10 years, that hasn't been really a factor that we've had to take into account, and now it is. And that I think is really hopeful. I'd like to think that Facebook will follow suit.
But what do you really think?
I think that it's unlikely that Facebook will.
So, Anne, I guess, same question, of course. So just as a reminder, is asking, what we think the current mood is between consumers with companies with regards to trust, and where you think we need to get to.
Well, I think I wouldn't disagree that trust is at a bit of an all-time low, but I think that the examples that Daniel was giving were more about maybe the government messages. I've lived in Holland myself, and the Dutch are very straightforward, and they do engender a sort of high level of feeling that people are being honest with you when they tell you things. And I think from a company perspective, it depends what business that you're actually in. People still apparently have a high level of trust in their financial suppliers, and I'm including banks in this. And I think that in order to maintain that trust as we move into the artificial intelligence age, you have to work very hard to make sure that you're behaving ethically in terms of AI. So, we've actually set out principles of things that we want to do as we're developing AI, and we do use AI all over the company, but things like, let's always have human-centered design. In other words, what is actually the benefit to society? How are the things we're building impacting humans? What's the human experience of it? So starting from that point of view, I think that's very important to build trust. Of course, the transparency, completely agree on that. You have to be transparent about what you're doing in order to be trustworthy, but you also have to provide really safe and secure environments so people feel that if you're holding information about them or data, that it's secure. And of course, you have to design with privacy in mind, so privacy by design. So there are, I would say, beyond transparency, there are many different components that you would have to build now and in the future in order to increase consumer trust and maintain consumer trust at a level that you actually need it to operate effectively around the world. We've got 2.4 billion cards out there, and we do about 65 billion transactions a year. And that is a lot of data. And so being able to hold that data in a real-time, anonymized way is very important to us.
So, I mean, I guess it's a given we would understand that Mastercard, has to be a company with great responsibility around data. But Damian, WeTransfer, maybe less people are aware, but it's always been such a principled company with regards to its use of personal data. I mean, it's pretty much one of the founding principles, right? So it'd be really interesting to hear from you how you designed privacy and a lean data policy into your DNA as a company as well, which I think can hopefully help inspire other people building businesses from the ground up today and how they think about using privacy and data.
Yeah, so we did it by sort of by default as opposed to really by design. So initially the service was entirely free, so there was no data, there was no sign up, we weren't really collecting any information, and we didn't want to use banner advertising or a lot of the programmatic advertising that people were pushing at the time. So our focus really was on these large format full screen ads that didn't require any information. So by default we had none. So we sort of stumbled into being a lean data business, as I called it, purely because we were focused on the aesthetic side of web design and not on the collection of data. Fast forward 10 years, we now also send billions of files all over the world. We have 60+ million customers, and we do have a subscription business, and we do have other tools like WePresent, which is a long form media business, and Collect, Paste, a presentation tool, and Paper, a really well-known drawing app. And these are, they sit in the App Store and on iOS and Android devices all over the world. So we do collect data today, and the challenge that we'll have, and every company is going to have going forwards, particularly now that the media landscape has changed so much, is how do you build out these businesses and collect data and do it in an ethical manner that ultimately, at the end of the day, people trust you with, and trust that you're going to protect their privacy and sort of do good by them. We've always tried to make sure that we put our customer at the forefront of pretty much everything that we do. Not to the same degree as a bank would, because I think it's a completely different, or Mastercard would. It's a completely different, exchange. But what we were proud of, from the very early days, was that when we were measuring trust and we were looking at net promoter scores, for example, we were getting nearly 82% in terms of net promoter score, really because we treated the web as if it was an offline experience. And that's something that I think is really interesting, and something I think we need to explore in more depth, across more organizations going forward. What is it that we like about the offline world that we can apply to the online world? What are those values that we need to try to make apparent and appear online that we really, have huge affinity towards in the offline experience?
And Anne, what do you think might be the pros and cons, for example, of a totally lean approach like Damian's and WeTransfer versus a rich approach from a global giant, where of course you have to gather all this data and it gives you lots of rich information about your customers?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think, as you've just pointed out, Dan, that there isn't a choice depending on what industry you're in. I mean, and even Damian is saying now that he's getting into more data. I think that we all are, because data is certainly the fuel of the future. I think what you have to constantly do is look at yourself and say, how do I want to manage this, and what do I do to protect my customers and consumers, and what do I do to protect myself? I think we've been very careful not to collect private data. So, for example, if you were using one of our products, let's say you were using your card, we don't know whether you're a man or a woman. We don't know where you live. And we don't know what your bank account information is. All we know is that 16-digit number on your card has done a transaction. So we collect big anonymized data, and that is actually a choice. The other data resides in different data sources. Of course, as we move forward, we've been thinking about things like digital identity, because we think digital identity will be really important to the future, but how to design that safely. And our view is, don't build a monolithic system, the type of thing that you've got in India, but actually leave the data sitting at the gold sources. So the passport office keeps your passport data, your driver's license office keeps your driver's license data, your bank keeps your bank data, but you're able to pull and aggregate that data to answer questions on identity, yes or no questions, so you're not giving too much information away. I think that's the kind of privacy by design thing that I'm talking about for the future. And by the way, it's interesting because in the future, let's say a vaccine comes along, or let's say we start to get more faith that if we have an antibody test that we're immune, then we're going to need something like a yellow fever type of certificate. It's likely to be carried around digitally. And we've been working with Gavi and developed something called Health Pass that actually shows whether people have been inoculated. Well, you can see that is a kind of digital identity solution. And, in the current pandemic situation, you could see how valuable that might be if you could hold that in a private way, but be able to travel from country to country and share it cross-border. So it's a very interesting area about what you actually hold in the way of information, how you can use this information, how you can give it to the individual so they decide, they consent when to share it and when not to, and how you build it with global standards so that you can move around the world more easily in the future.
So I think, obviously, it's so easy for us just to focus on talking about trust, given the nature of both of your business. But I want to talk about other essential ingredients of leadership as well. Now, obviously, it'd be remiss not to talk about the experience that you'll both have had managing through a crisis, managing businesses through a crisis, from potentially your living rooms. And it would be great to know what tips you have for other people that might be managing through a crisis now that you've had the experience to share. So, Damian, if we can start with you.
I mean, being really honest, I think the first 2 weeks I really struggled personally with it because I'm a bit of a control freak. My nature is to try to, get control of the situation. And obviously this one we had no control over whatsoever. So I would say, honestly, the first couple of weeks were quite stressful, I think, in just understanding and come to realize that this was out of our control and that we were just going to really have to sit back and see what happened. I would say that it's been a quite transformative period for the company because despite the fact that we're an online business and everything that we do is in the cloud, we have quite a strong company culture and we have quite nice offices in LA, New York, and Amsterdam and London, where people really quite enjoy coming to the office and and the social aspect. So we had quite a lot of people that were really missing out on being together and connecting and sharing ideas. And as I said, WeTransfer is just one part of our business, but We Present, for example, is an editorial platform that thrives from that energy that's given by sitting across the table and sharing ideas and bouncing things off one another. And that is difficult to do when it's completely remote. 10 weeks down the line, I think what's been quite impressive is how the team has proved to be able to adapt to, find different ways of being able to, not do exactly the same, but capture those moments of inspiration and serendipity. And I would say as an organization with people all over the world, obviously not the same level as Mastercard, but we've got quite a nice cadence of weekly catch-ups where everybody comes together and basically shares updates of what's happening in different parts of the world in the business. And because everyone's been at home, we've been able to get some quite remarkable speakers to come and just join us for 10 minutes of talking about what's happening in the world, how they're feeling mentally, what we should do to be a little bit more optimistic. And we've had people from Giles Dooley to Alain de Botton come and join us. Just for a brief chat for the company.
I don't believe that you managed to get Alain de Botton to only talk for 10 minutes. That's not actually possible.
It was 10
really?
minutes. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And it was fantastic. No, it was really quite special because, like I said, you can get people to come and talk at the moment. Everyone is sort of available because no one's on these ridiculous travel schedules that we all had. So anyway, long story short, I think the time that we've had to reflect has been quite transformative for the company. And I'd be very surprised going forwards if the way that we operate and work as a business isn't completely changed. And by next year, we're looking very differently at the way that we work and how we treat office space. And I think that office space will be creative space. And that I think is quite cool.
What about yourself, Anne?
Well, I mean, it's obviously I personally managed through the Lehman crisis because I was actually managing Lehman through its bankruptcy across Europe, into Middle East and Africa and so on. So from a financial point of view, I have a lot of experience of that. But of course, this is a completely different situation. And of course, we have a senior team that meets every day and discusses, what's happening around the world, tracks what's happening with all of our employees. If you hear our CEO talk, RJ, he'll say people are number one, number two, number three when we come to think about what we're doing. But actually, if we take a wider stakeholder view, what we're looking at is what are we doing for our people? What are we doing across all of our markets? And actually, what are we doing for society? And it's quite interesting because, I mean, yes, being a bigger company, we have resources to look at all of these things simultaneously as we need to have to be able to run our businesses. And I would say that making our people feel that we're acting in their best interest, that we're sending out consistent messages around the world, that we give them a lot of freedom of choice about what they want to do, what they are comfortable with within what's happening inside their own country. That's really important. And that they all feel that they're treated decently and that we're helping each other. And I would say there's a lot of feeling of camaraderie actually built during crisis, and this is no exception. In terms of things like society, you maybe saw that we joined up with the Wellcome Foundation and the Gates Foundation to actually create a fund of 125 million to invest in various therapeutics and vaccine research and so on. And these are the kind of things that I think are good to do and exciting to do. And of course, you can do it if you're a company that's profitable, has a good balance sheet. And of course, surviving through the crisis is actually to do with this. From our customer perspective, what's happening in the markets is, well, there's been a sort of rapid transition, as you might imagine, in many markets from just the physical world into the e-com world. I know that I've got Amazon parcels arriving more or less every day. Not me, I've got a daughter at home as well. So to just give you a statistic, I think in the UK, the e-commerce volumes are something like 33% now of purchases. That's kind of without the petrol and so forth. And at the same time, people are moving to contactless, and that's changing the whole shape of our business across the world. And of course, we have to run this network 24/7 and make everything work. And it's just a very interesting time to do that. Everything's been working very well. And I think people take a bit of a pride in that as well. So a lot of things going on. And I think that it's well coordinated and well communicated, because in a crisis, communication is everything. So absolutely, we have a couple of global management team meetings a week. We have daily meetings on how we're managing through this period. And then we have all hands meeting. There'll be another one this afternoon every couple of weeks or so. And all the messages are cascaded down into the countries. So that's what's going on.
So one of the more cited essential ingredients for great leadership is the ability to demonstrate vulnerability and admit that you don't necessarily know any more than others. Have there been good examples over the last few months where you've done that personally and had conversations with others in your team that have made them feel comfortable that you know what you're doing, whilst also knowing that you're a human being going through a strange time as well? So either of you pop up with if you've had an experience like that so far?
I think there's been a lot of conversations like that going on around the world. I certainly had virtual coffee sessions with quite a few groups inside the company where we have talked about that. And one of the groups that I convene is actually all of the women executives, vice presidents. So it's the top women in the company, is about 50 of them. And actually we have, because it's women, I think, although I'm not precluding that this is happening to men as well, because Daniel's just been talking about his kids, but the women are talking a lot about homeschooling. What's happening, what's going on with their parents. Some people who, have had bereavements, not through COVID, interestingly, but just, parents dying during this period. And that's been quite tough for people. People flying home as a result of that. One of my people I was chatting to flew home from Singapore to Korea and went through during the coffee session the whole experience of how landing in Korea, being tested, staying in the airport 6 hours because she was going to her dad's funeral, and people wondering, when things are going to revert to a little bit more of a normal life in their country. And it's very different from country to country. So absolutely, those conversations have been going on. And they've been very real, and I think that people have developed even deeper relationships as a result of this, even though it's virtual. But of course, the virtual side allows you to have these group conversations in a way you couldn't do if you were just having a chat in your local office. I used to travel 44 weeks a year in order to get around everywhere I was managing inside Mastercard in the world, which is a lot of travel. But of course, I would be seeing people on the ground in those offices, and it was absolutely great because the physical connection is wonderful, because actually we're human beings. But now that's been replaced by being able to do global connections in a way that we didn't do so frequently before.
And what about yourself, Damian?
Yeah, I think as a company, we sort of pride ourselves on being pretty honest and empathetic, and I'd say that there isn't really any conversation that's off limits. Naturally, I think we've always had these sort of open forums where anyone was able to ask any question, and I would say, pretty much from the get-go, we've had similar forums, like we're doing right now with Slido, where you can ask anonymous questions, and we use tools like Home Run and different platforms where you can, monitor sentiment and ask questions anonymously, or, put things into a suggestion box, which I think will always get dealt with, and certainly there are no questions that are, left unanswered, or at least they shouldn't be. I think it's been quite interesting, even in this experience, right, that you get a window into someone's home, into someone's life, and I think it's quite intimate to some degree, that you have this time that very often is one-on-one, and that is harder, I think, to some degree, to create in the real world, because we are on different schedules and we're running around. So I think there's sort of a calming element to this, which I found means that you can be a little bit more intimate, and you can perhaps have more focused, more intelligent dialogue than we were perhaps able to do before, with trying to juggle a million things that we all had going on. As a company, we spend a huge amount of time supporting the industry that basically helps us to exist. So the creative community is very much what is the lifeblood of WeTransfer. We've always given away 30% of our ad inventory to support those artists and to support the creators, and that still exists today. We give away billions of ad impressions every year to support different organizations, whether it's about gun reform or anything else, and that sort of belief system, I think, that exists within the company enables people to bring suggestions and to bring personality and honesty, I think, to the table every single day. And the last week has been interesting, that we have this belief that we should help the organizations or the artists or charities, whatever it is, that live around the ecosystem of WeTransfer. And the company felt very impassioned about Black Lives Matter and about issues around racism, and wanted to do something, and of course leapt on the opportunity to use the inventory that we had to support some of those organizations, and that happens in a very timely manner, and it's very, very quick, because I think those dialogues and that sort of communication channel is there, and it's always open, and that's something I think that is quite unique about WeTransfer, and has allowed us and allows us, I think, to have those honest conversations more regularly, that perhaps is a benefit of the situation that we're in right now, as opposed to the negative side, which I initially experienced with video calls and working from home, dealing with homeschooling and all the rest of the issues that we have to deal with.
What, as someone who hasn't had to suffer through, doing homeschooling, and knowing how, my own colleagues are having so much additional stress with that, I just feel lucky to be in my living room, because usually I'm with relegated. Right, and I'm usually just relegated. That's our anniversary present to each other, to make sure we actually stay healthy. But usually just been working in my bedroom. So actually, the benefits of doing this is sometimes you get to do something like CogX or have a serious interview, and you have a newfound respect for your own living room that you never usually had. So I think it's important to a conversation I was having with Anne last week was, it's a really interesting point of view that she shared, which was on the opportunity as companies to demonstrate leadership at a time when it might feel like, as individuals in different governments and different countries, obviously, they might be failing us. And obviously, both of you running international companies and being in different countries right now will have some examples of that. So I think it'd be really interesting for this last section just to explore what benefits you think the companies actually have to demonstrate leadership to society and to their customers at a time when it does feel like our governments are failing us. And seeing as this was your brilliant insight, Anne, it's only fair that you take up all of the good answers and leave Damian with nothing good to say.
Again.
Yeah.
Well, I think the conversation we had, Dan, was along the lines that as global companies, it's very much in our interest. And I think Damian referred to things like the supply chain, understanding how the world works and so on, to actually make things work on a global basis. I mean, we're very interested in that and making things work well. And of course, therefore, we don't take a view that many governments are taking of being very inward looking. And I think that is the real difference between the big global companies and what's actually happening with the politicians right now. And it's a really weird thing, because if you think right down to the consumers, when you travel around the world, we're all dressing the same, we're all watching the same things on Netflix, we're drinking the same drinks, eating the same food. Consumers are becoming very similar in every part of the world that you go to. And yet, governments are becoming very polarized. And I think that this is where the big companies, well, not just the big companies, the big and small companies, need to stand up and, as I said at the beginning, have a social purpose, have impact, think about the way that they're running their business in a way that, is good. And do things that do well by doing good as well, because it's not an either or in business. You can do this. When we IPO'd in 2006, we took 10% of our stock and we put it in a foundation. Now, at the time we IPO'd, we were only worth about 5 billion. Today we're worth over 300 billion. So the thing is that our foundation has moved from 500 million to 30 billion as a result of this. So every time the company grew, the foundation grew. And coming up with models, sustainable models in business like this that allow you to invest in the world and do the right thing by the world, I think this is where businesses should be going.
Damian, I feel like Anne could have just gone on, but she's thrown you a few morsels of insights to be able to share generously.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Right, we just announced that we became a B Corporation. Martha Lane Fox is going to chair our board. I think we always had this understanding of what it meant to be a good business. But to be frank, in the beginning, and when we first started out, we always had the belief that a lot of the venture capitalists and the investment world just didn't really believe in our notion of good business. It seemed like we were giving away an awful lot of stuff that could have been put into people's pockets, and that wasn't good. And what's quite exciting is that that B Corporation movement and the idea of behaving a bit more like Patagonia or Ben & Jerry's, or perhaps even Mastercard with a foundation, is what I think the consumer is getting excited about and is almost demanding from business. That if you aren't being good, then they don't really want to have anything to do with you. And that's where we go back to transparency. I think companies are going to be checked and questioned and have a lot more demands put on them to demonstrate that they are acting and behaving really in the way that they talk, or in the way people expect them to behave. And that didn't really exist. Well, it did exist at the beginning of the beginning of the 20th century. It did exist. Companies were operating like that, and somewhere in between the end of the Industrial Revolution and the end of the Second World War, we lost it, and companies started really just focusing on shareholder value and really just trying to deliver a good bottom line, and that's shifted, and that I think is really exciting. I think there are plenty of organizations that are coming up today that so I've got to let somebody in the front door. There are plenty of organizations that are coming up today that are really focused on behaving better and acting differently. And like I said, we only started in 2009, and that was just not the case. There were really only a very few exceptions, and one of them that I talk about in the book is Ben & Jerry's. That I think if you look at what Ben & Jerry's has achieved, they've really changed the entire way that Unilever looks at business. So, it's non-GM, it's organic. Unilever is talking about becoming a B Corporation too. Phenomenal. And this really started with these two hippies from Vermont. Unimaginable, really, 20 years ago.
But Unilever was,
Totally
in fairness,
imaginable 100
already on
years
a path. As in Unilever was
not
already...
before Ben & Jerry's.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I thought it was always quite a good business like that. Does good leadership include finishing your point to keep someone outside your home? Are you going to let this person in?
Is that all right? I'll be 10 seconds.
I feel like you should, yeah.
Okay, I'll keep my headphones on.
Thanks, yeah, please do. Just perfect leadership in action. I guess because we've got 5 minutes left, I think it'd be really helpful to get a summary of insights from your journey and what might have shifted now about what you think the key ingredients for great leadership actually are for you as people, and how you might have thought about that at the start of your career, and how you think about that now with a lot more experience and insight.
Well, I think, we're living in an internet world now. I remember when I was at Citibank, one of my managers back actually in the 80s said to me, look, Anne, we're all nodes in a network. This is way pre the internet. And he said, a great leader is someone whose node shines brightly, who connects with other nodes in the network and can actually influence, right across the network. And that was his way of describing that you don't run a global business by needing to see the whites of everyone's eyes, that, your influence extends out in a networked way. And I thought that was really fascinating as I grew up more in the corporate world to think about that description, because it was so far ahead of its time. But I think that it's so relevant. I think if you want to change the world, then you have to do it through influence. We're not living in a hierarchical world anymore. People don't join companies and stay there all their lives and, climb up the ladder in a very straight way and have messages coming up and down from the top. I just don't think it works that way anymore. So great leadership is all about influence, and of course influence across the whole stakeholder group. You mentioned, Dan, that companies had been so focused on their shareholders for so long, and I think that's true. But over the last few years, it had been changing quite a lot. And if you hear some of the great leaders today, they'll start probably talking about their people, even though they're a technology business. Their people will be, absolutely at the front of what they're thinking of. And as I say, we think people, markets, society, and thinking of the whole picture in a really broad way. So I think that's the great successful leaders of now.
And Damian? I've done it again, haven't I? I've let Anne just give all the good answers.
I'm used to it by now.
Be good at the door.
Yeah, exactly. He's mesmerized by whatever it was. I mean, was it your
briefed everybody. I'm annoyed because I briefed everybody. Make sure that you take your keys with you because I've got to do. I can't get up. And then what happens? Of course, that's not good leadership. There we go.
But to your point earlier about actually seeing inside a window of, the everyday, the homes and the everyday nuances that happen in people's lives, actually, like a moment like that is a perfect example of one of the nice things about this sort of unusual connected world, because you get these moments of real life. It's not all serious.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's been quite cool, because it does feel quite personal when you're in someone's home, because I'm always the person that's looking at your background going, okay, what is that picture at the top left there, Dan? I can't really see it, but it means something to you, right? And you chose it for a reason, and it's on your wall because it was given to you, or you bought it at a certain moment in your life. That's quite cool, and that's quite intimate. That I don't think we would have normally had, that window into different people's worlds. I mean, so my view on leadership has changed massively. I think that when I first started out in advertising and in fashion, it was really about working 24/7. And great leaders demonstrated that they were great because they gave up everything to work for the company, and would be prepared to put everything on the line, for the company. And ideally, you would have been divorced 2 or 3 times, lost all your friends, and be prepared to be on a plane permanently to demonstrate that you were great. Today, I think that the ability to understand the importance of work-life, and again, this is a privilege in working in the Netherlands, where work-life balance it's not really a marketing buzzword. It's just really the way that people think and operate. Is quite refreshing that it's becoming more widely placed, and even in the US, where it has been about grit and determination, pioneering and prospecting for so long, it's becoming really first and foremost part of business. And look at Jack Dorsey, who's running a company the size of Twitter and Square, that's able to talk about to his shareholders too about living in Africa for part of the year, running multiple companies, and being a Buddhist monk and probably everything else at the same time, and people are okay with it. That's really quite compelling, I think, for the future of work and for the future of leadership, that we can have families, and you can juggle things, and you can have faults, and you can have aspirations beyond the company, and make that all work. Those sort of things, I think, are quite exciting and compelling going forwards for leadership.
Basically, you can be a human. So a lovely place to finish up in our section of the Artificial Intelligence Conference. So handing back to our lovely stage host, please.
Thank you very much to all the panelists, and for the insights as to how to answer the door whilst being a leader. For those wanting to ask more questions of our panelists, I know that lots have already been coming in on Slido. Please grab a coffee, do what you need, and come back in 15 minutes to the Q&A stage to get more insights into exactly how you manage the transition through COVID-19. Thank you very much to all of our participants again, and see you soon.
Great, thank you.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.